Hey, my name is Zachary Pace. I'm presenting my research project for the semester. I did my research project over urban search and rescue response. I was able to find a lot of interesting information regarding the response sets, and overall, I wanted to figure out how to improve our search and rescue response for natural and man-made disasters. Uh, and improve survivability of the victims that are trapped and need help. Um, the reason I chose this topic was I work for a fire department. We specifically have a few members of the on the Texas Task Force One team, which is a FEMA USAR team, and we as a fire department we respond to smaller incidents. As far as the FEMA task force teams go, they respond to larger incidents. So it was kind of something that interests me on a larger scale, something that I already have a part in. So the purpose, I wanted to address areas of improvement for the USAR team in response. Also to improve survivability of victims. What can we do to uh, increase the survivability of those trapped or stranded, and what could we what are the current numbers, and what would the numbers look like if we improved some factors. A couple key terms: USAR is Urban Search and Rescue. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's a branch of the Department of Homeland Security. And lastly, EMS will be mentioned a couple times, and that's Emergency Medical Services. As far as literature goes, there's a handful of very good studies done. I've tagged all of them at the end of this presentation uh, that I looked at. So FEMA's website itself has the framework available for anybody to go look at to understand what the FEMA's requirements are for the teams. And so a lot of that consists of the makeup of the teams. They roughly have 75 members. They go and they are trained in all hazards, hazmat, high angle rescue, ropes, emergency medical services. A lot of the members are firefighters, paramedics. Um, and so this all hazards approach lets them kind of tackle a bunch of different obstacles depending on what they're called out to. It also requires them to, when activated, to deploy to the uh, location they're deployed to within 6 hours of activation. How they do this is the 75 member team will actually split up and they'll rotate on call months basically, to where they, the month of April, it is Group A, and if there's a deployment to be had, Group A would go. It would be their month to cover it. But next month in May, they'd be off. It'd be Group B's turn, so on and so forth. Rom and Kelman, they pretty much looked at what could be an alternative for USAR teams at the international level, and there's nothing that compares. The benefit that international USAR teams have uh, for given incidents outweighs the training and capabilities of any single government agency or local level government agency. So and they took in consideration of the FEMA task force teams that respond internationally, as well as those from I believe Germany, Israel, and a couple of other countries as well. Latham, his article really was a logistical article, and the biggest issue he found is interoperability uh, discrepancies. Just whenever one agency comes in to help another, the way things are done, as you can imagine, would be a little off. So he really suggests that since FEMA has the task force teams and they're the ones, at least here in the United States, that would most likely render aid. That everybody kind of switches over to the way that the FEMA task force operates, just so that there's a little bit of a standard in operations. And then there's a handful of articles that brought up different technological advancements. I mean, as with everything, technology has room to make things better. Uh, with that, it also has its struggles of training personnel to use the equipment. But some of the ideas that were brought up and talked about are unmanned drones to fly areas of disaster, and putting like thermal imaging devices or night vision um, devices on those drones to kind of scan the area to see if they can locate any victims or any areas that have different temperature readings, that maybe they need to go move debris in to see if there's a body there or a victim there. Another thing is robots to cut down on manpower. Have somebody using a robot to kind of canvas an area, and instead of having a group of people walk somewhere where it could be hazardous, it would increase safety for the USAR personnel to not have to walk in areas that might not be the safest. And then if the robot locates a victim, then they can come up with a game plan on how to get over to where that victim is. My methodology during this, I used both quantitative and qualitative data. Uh, I couldn't really conduct any experiments because creating a disaster is unethical. So there's not really an experiment you could put together to test a single factor to see if it would improve response time or survivability of victims. I did conduct a handful of interviews with people on Texas Task Force 1 that work at my fire department and surrounding fire departments, and kind of gain some insight on their responses to certain incidents. So as far as USAR go, I already talked about it. They're activated in the event of a disaster. A couple of the ones that I looked at were the Surfside condo collapse last year in Florida. It was a building collapse due to structural issues. So it wasn't caused by something foreseeable like a hurricane or a storm, uh, wildfire, something that, once it's kind of generated, you can prepare for. Um, Earthquakes kind of fall into that category of something that you're not really Prepared for it just happens. We don't have many indications that an earthquake's going to happen. So with that, when they're activated, since it's a federal response, um, it has to go up through the chain of command. So on the city level has to request assistance from the state, and then the state has to reach out to the federal government. This could take, a matter of hours to days. In the case of the Surfside condo collapse, it happened at around 1 in the morning. That was when the initial call came in to the fire department. Fire department gets out there. Their resources are overwhelmed. They have to activate response assistance from the state outside of their automatic aid. And it wasn't until about 36 hours later that federal assistance was requested, and the FEMA task force teams were sent to the location. So the teams have a designated response set. Like I said, they have a set number of individuals to respond to any emergency they're called out for, based on FEMA's framework. And there's teams on all levels. For the department I work for, we have a kind of automatic aid set up where we have our own search and rescue, technical rescue teams that are available to us, and we activate those on any structure fire that goes more than 2 alarms. Any large vehicle accident, we can activate the rescue. Um, and so we do have that on a small level, and those units are actually staffed by members of the task force teams, some of the ones I interviewed. So it's actually cool to have those individuals with all the experience from their task force training actually assist us on smaller scale incidents here in the city. In the state level, they also have their own task force teams. Texas actually has 2 teams, Task Force 1 and Task Force 2. Texas Task Force 2 is state only. It I'm not going to say they never get deployed international. I'm sure, or national or international. I'm sure there could be a point where they could get pulled out of the state for assistance, but Texas Task Force 2 traditionally stays in state, for instance, opposed to Task Force 1 will respond wherever the federal government kind of sends them. So I know they've been all over the state here. They've gone to Louisiana, California, Haiti, uh, multiple different locations based on hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, all sorts of disasters. And as I mentioned earlier, it's an all hazards approach because when these buildings collapse or are damaged by a storm, earthquake, whatever it is, there could be hazardous materials there. There's going to be people injured. They're going to need different ways to perform rescues. So having the technical abilities of a hazmat team, paramedics, uh, an engineering mindset, or technical rescue mindset, it helps them cover all their bases as they go into these areas. I figured out that we don't celebrate our wins. This goes for urban search and rescue, the fire service in general. All of our documentation that we fill out for an incident, there's no area that you fill out for the rescues made. Everything's intended for insurance purposes. So insurance doesn't care if you got somebody out of the house alive and they went on their merry way, or you pulled them from the debris. Um, they're more concerned about, was there a loss of life? And so I believe that something to address this in the future would be to modify some of the forms that we use to try to factor in and track that statistic of rescues made. Another obstacle to hurdle would be HIPAA laws. It's difficult to obtain records from hospitals, figure out long-term survivability of the patients or victims that are rescued, whether they were alive whenever we pulled them from the debris, they went to the hospital and later passed away, succumbing to their injuries, or were they discharged and expected to make a full recovery. And then there's a discrepancy in documenting time. Every incident starts at minute 0 whenever it occurs, whether it's the building collapsing, hurricane making landfall, earthquake, wildfire, tornado. It all starts, and then the clock starts running. There could be a significant delay in when USAR personnel arrive. The way the framework is set up, as soon as they're activated, they have 6 hours to make the scene. So if they get activated as soon as the incident strikes or occurs, it could be 6 hours before they get there. If they have a lag in any request for aid, it could be 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours before they make scene. And so that makes it difficult to track when rescues are made. Do we track it from, well, we made a rescue within 5 minutes of being deployed onto the scene? Or did we make the rescue 5 minutes into the incident after the earthquake struck. So just some clarity on documenting time and how that delay could affect documentation. So like I said, I did conduct some interviews. I talked to 4 firemen that I work with or work closely with. Each of them are on Texas Task Force 1, serving in different facets. So some of the data I found interesting is I asked them about their response time to kind of where they get briefed and then deploy from there, because they have a certain time frame that they have to respond to, and that's their 6-hour window. So the first kind of line graph that I have here documents kind of the time it took them to get to briefing. And there's a pretty big variety as far as that goes because they all live in different areas. So the 3 incidents that they all 3 had a part in were Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, and the California wildfires in 2018. So I broke down those response times, and sometimes the guys made it there quicker than others. Then the second chart I made was I asked them if they could recall any rescues they made. And so those numbers are kind of rounded out because there's no form or anything. It's just trying to recall from their memory if they, were on the boat and helped get somebody out of a house or, what exactly was happening. So you can see kind of what those numbers are, the team or the group they were set up with, how many rescues they roughly made during those incidents. And so it's pretty cool to see those numbers. Conclusions, the current framework FEMA has set up, I think, is beneficial. But it's been a while since it's been revisited, and I think there could be more improvements made. And even if FEMA set up different branches to where there's a state level response at every state to make things quicker or a way to reduce the lag time from initial request for aid to deployment. So another area of improvement, like I said, with documentation, if we could document our wins, document the rescues so we could track those numbers. And I truly believe that addition of technology, drones or robots, not only could increase the safety of the USAR team personnel, but also could prove beneficial to the victims that are trapped. It was frustrating through all this that the actual statistics, there was no documentation there. And as I mentioned earlier, we can't really conduct an experiment to truly test numbers to see if response time would increase survivability, to see if the addition of drones or robots searching to pinpoint an area that they need to search would help, or to identify that area faster to get them there. But a lot of the research I read drew similarities to EMS and fire, and a lot of that data suggests that an increase or a decrease in response time significantly impacts the survivability of trauma patients and those injured and like motor vehicle accidents and things of that nature. So I appreciate your time going over all this, and thank you so much. Here's my brief works cited. A lot of these articles had a lot of great information that I drew from. So again, thank you so much.